There you go.
Here we go. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Continuing Professional Education's monthly free hot topic. We are very happy to have Gwen Zervas, the director of the Division of Remediation Management, with us this morning from DEP. I'm going to hold off on formal introductions. I'll let Dr. Berkowitz do that. Dr. Berkowitz, along with myself, are the founders of Continuing Professional Education Services. Also with us today, though she disappeared from my screen, is Julianne Masago, who is our executive director. And as I always say, you are in this course because she gave you the right information to get you in here. Without her, we would not be able to do anything that we do on a daily basis and be able to provide great educational opportunities for people, as well as great guest speakers. We do have about, cutting out duplications and stuff like that, about 150 for today's program. We're at about 87 right now, but we're going to go because, again, cognizant of everybody's time, and we want to make sure that we keep to people's schedules. This is recorded. We will be posting it on our website. That way you can always view it or share it with other colleagues that you may have. We'll do the handouts after Gwen makes her presentations and make sure you can get copies of those. We'll do that in the chat. If you have questions, we want this to be as interactive as possible after Gwen and George go through their presentations. But we want to hear from you also. We do that in a couple different ways. One, you can raise your hand virtually and I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself. Two, you can put your questions into the chat and we'll read them and go over them. But what I do ask is that while the speakers are speaking, that you do stay muted. You can control your own mute, but if you can do that, just so there's no interference and no disruptions during the presentations. And I think with that, I'm reading my notes. I did everything I was supposed to do, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Berkowitz now.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Jules. And most importantly, thank you, Gwen, for being here. I'm going to introduce Gwen in a second. I just want to say, quite frankly, that this is kind of an inflection point where we are with the site remediation program. We've been through a series of inflection points, particularly with the advent of the Site Remediation Reform Act. I do believe, quite frankly, that there is opportunities to always improve upon the status quo, but it takes a willingness of perhaps both parties who, assuming that there are only two parties, to really engage in a process that's meaningful and productive. Rather than sit in the trees and snipe, it doesn't get anything done. But being able to work cooperatively together is the means to improving upon a status quo. And I'm very pleased to say that that's what's happening with the department at this point. I will tell you right now that I was, quite frankly, pleasantly surprised at the level of commitment that the department is making to look at the site remediation program. And I do believe, in my opinion, and I'm not going to embarrass Gwen too much, she has been the linchpin to making this thing happen. There is, I would recommend that everybody read the preamble of the Brownfield and Contaminated Site Redevelopment Act. Read the preamble of what that says. It talks about the department being flexible. It talks about the department being timely. It talks about the department of being efficient. And I think, quite frankly, I'm not so sure that was always the case. But I do believe there's been an opportunity here for people to, and in the department, to be evaluative and objective. And I think, again, Gwen has to take a lot of credit for that. While I'm giving credit to people, I want to give a big shout out to Tony Russo, who's probably not on this presentation, this session, but Tony Russo of Commerce Industry and Association of New Jersey has put together a group of people who are a very diverse group of people who have been working with the department. Not to mention, certainly there are other groups, LSRPA to mention one, have been working with the department. But I do want to say that it's going to be a process. And it's not going to happen overnight. And it's going to take time. And it's going to take commitment. And it's going to take follow-up. And it's going to take the opportunity to be objective and good listeners as well as good doers. So with that, I'm going to introduce Gwen. Gwen's the director of the site. Well, I'm just going to call it the old thing, the site remediation program. And Gwen comes to us with 30 some years of experience at DEP, and she started when she was 12. So give her, her due. But in the process, she did go to college. She went to Catholic University, where she got a degree in chemical engineering. She must be really smart, by the way. And she also has a master's degree from Acadia in secondary education, which I think will go a long way in trying to deal with us folks on the outside, particularly me. Gwen has been a breath of fresh air as far as I'm concerned, who's been willing to listen. And not only willing to listen, but willing to take steps that may not necessarily be popular within her own ranks. So without further ado, I want to thank Gwen profusely and turn the program over to her. Gwen, thank you so much.
Thank you, George. I appreciate that introduction. So I have some slides. There we go.
It worked.
Now I just have to, my talking points disappeared on me here. All right, I'm all ready to go. Thank you, Phil. So I'm happy to be here with all of you today. I really appreciate the invitation. And I'd like to start off by just going over the Division of Remediation Management as a whole. I learned that people don't always know everything that division is working on. I'm going to talk about that first, followed by a Remediation Process Improvement Initiative, or RPII, and then some proposed changes to our regulations related to remedial action permits. Next slide, please. So this is an org chart of the Contaminated Site Remediation Redevelopment Program, which everybody still calls a site remediation program, but our name has changed. So the Division of Remediation Management, I'm the director of that, and it's comprised of about 150 people. I report to David Hames, who's the Assistant Commissioner of Contaminated Site Remediation and Redevelopment. There's another division in our program, and that's the Division of Enforcement, Technical, and Financial Support. And Frank DeFeo is the acting director of that division. Next slide, please. I'm just going to go over some of the groups that are within the division. I'm going to make this really fast because I know people may not have too much interest in this, but the first group I'd like to talk about is our Office of Brownfield and Community Revitalization, which is a small office, but it handles a lot. And this office reports directly to me. This office assists with site remediation projects in brownfield development areas throughout the state. They review our HDSRF funding applications. So if you have any clients that municipalities that are asking for funding, we provide those reviews. We also review landfill development projects in that group. So it's a busy group. The big news I want to share with everyone today is that we are going to be opening up applications for new brownfield development areas this September. We haven't done this in many years, and we're excited to relaunch the program. So please stay tuned for more information about this. We're really excited about this. Next slide, please. So there's 3 elements within the Division of Remediation Management, and each element should have an assistant director, but at this time we have 2 vacant assistant director positions. Our first element, the first element I'm going to talk about is our remediation oversight element. There's 2 bureaus there. The Bureau of Case Management, that handles our traditional oversight cases, and the direct oversight cases, sites that are out of compliance, they've taken enforcement action, and they are direct oversight. So as some LSRPs may be working with the Bureau of Case Management on those sites. We also have the Bureau of Field Operations. We have Northern and Southern field offices. They're the ones that handle our child care center reviews, the unregulated heating oil tanks, or UHOT, we call them. They issue the NFAs and provide oversight of those. They conduct engineering control inspections. So you may run into folks from that bureau looking at caps at sites you've worked on. Next slide, please. Then get into our publicly funded response element. That's also comprised of 2 bureaus. This element handles all of our sites that are investigated and remediated using public money. That's because there's no responsible parties to conduct the work, whether it be that they have no money to conduct the remediation, they're recalcitrant, we don't know who the responsible parties are. That's in the case of unknown source investigations. So we have our Bureau of Site Management. They manage our publicly funded actions at sites, the remedial investigation, design, remedy implementation, O&M. We have contractors doing the work. We handle the contracts, and we provide oversight of those contractors. We do a lot of work in this group. We spend an average of $20 million a year for publicly funded remediation projects out of our site management group. Then we have our Bureau of Environmental Measurements and Site Assessment, which we call BEMSA. They handle our immediate environmental concern oversight. So they're both publicly funded and responsible party funded IEC cases. So LSRP is working on sites that have IECs, indoor air, potable well, contamination. They're assigned a case manager in our IEC unit. Staff in this bureau also conduct potable well, vapor intrusion sampling, and unknown source investigations. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the remediation review element, the element most of you probably interact with the most. This element is also comprised of two bureaus, the Bureau of Inspection and Review. That bureau inspects all documents submitted by LSRPs, conducts review of subset of those documents, and they review REOs. The Bureau of Remedial Action Permitting reviews permit applications and remedial action reports for sites with institutional engineering controls, issues soil and groundwater remedial action permits, and reviews the biennial protectness certifications that are submitted once a permit is issued. Next slide, please. So that gave you a flavor of all that Division of Remediation Management works on. Now to move on to the Remediation Process Improvement Initiative, or RPII. You're spending a lot of time working on this. And RPII is it's a collaborative effort between the department, LSRPs, and the regulated community and other interested stakeholders. We knew we needed to do some improvements. We asked for input from stakeholders regarding what their concerns are and what needed improvement. And listed as a summary of the input that was provided by stakeholders. Essentially, we take too long to review documents, and we provide comments long after a document is submitted. We conduct too many reviews versus inspections. The review and issuance of remedial action permits takes too long, and the permits needed, an REO can't be issued until that permit has been issued. And sometimes staff have requested additional work to be conducted based on preferences, not on regulations or guidance. Next slide, please. As a result of the stakeholder input, our program has been busy trying to make improvements, and I've listed 9 items that I'd like to highlight. I won't read them all to you, you can see them, but I will go over some of them in more detail. Next slide, please. One of the major complaints we heard about was the length of time it took for us to issue permits. So to help us get through our backlog of permits, we prioritized 5 permit types. These permits are those that are easier to issue and not as much review is required. So the goal was to find permits that we could issue quickly, get them out the door. So there were 5 types. They're listed here. I don't know that I need to go over them. I will just mention for the presumptive remedy type 2, those are sites that are childcare centers. For example, that there's a presumptive remedy required. There's other sites that may use a presumptive remedy that are not required to. So we know that that's a conservative approach. So we don't need to do much review of those permit applications for those sites. And then type 3 is for those educational childcare centers that are required to use a presumptive remedy, but have requested an alternative remedy, and we've approved that already. Next slide, please. Last year, we formed a committee called the Effective Collaborative Communications Committee, or the ECCC. And this committee was comprised of DEP staff, LSRPs, and other stakeholders. The goal of this committee was to help improve remedial action permit applications. So let's improve the applications that are submitted, make it easier for DEP to issue the permit. The committee determined the best way to assist LSRPs with permit applications was to prepare flowcharts that show the department's review process for permit applications and remedial action reports, and prepare frequently asked questions and answers. So the FAQs include questions and answers related to RAP applications and RAR submittals, and they are some of the items that are covered in those FAQs. They've been next slide, please. So the FAQs and the flowcharts have been posted. And there's the link to where you can find those documents. I strongly encourage you to look at those. They're really useful. A lot of work went into preparing those. There also was training. Really?
Gwen has frozen. Gwen, you froze for a second there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, when you said there was also train. So you're back now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good now.
Okay, sorry about that. I just got a message that my connection was unstable. So hopefully it holds out.
It's okay. Many of us are unstable
Yeah, my shrink tells me that. My shrink tells me that all the time, but I'm here.
in this industry. So yeah, you were starting to talk about the training.
Right, okay. So we had training last week on the FAQs and the flowcharts. The training was given by both internal people, DEP, and people affiliated with the LSRPA. It was a combined effort. That training is going to be posted. When I looked last night, it still had not been posted, but that's the link to where it will be posted. And we had, I think, about 400 people show up for that training. So I strongly encourage you to look at those documents, and when the training's posted, to look at that also. Next slide, please. Okay, another change that we've made. We've received feedback from LSRPs and the parties responsible for conducting remediation, the PRCRs, that receiving a letter from the department called a notice of technical deficiencies was problematic for many reasons. So we changed the term notice of technical deficiencies to notice of incomplete RAP application or key document submittal. So for example, a notice of incomplete remedial investigation. And we're going to refer to those letters as NOIs. We also changed the response time allowed to address the items identified in the NOI to 60 days. We previously only gave 30 days for a response, and we heard feedback that 30 days just isn't enough time to get work done that was needed to get done. So those 60 days can be used to either conduct additional remedial measures, provide additional information, clarification, or both. If 60 days isn't enough time, we're going to ask, if it's the case of a permit application, we're going to ask that the permit application be withdrawn, in which case a new application and remedial action report, if needed, would then need to be submitted. That addresses the issue raised in the NOI. But the hope is that 60 days is enough time. We want to get permits out the door and issued, but sometimes we just have questions and we need additional information. And hopefully 60 days is enough time to provide that to us. Next slide, please. If the items are not adequately addressed that were identified in the NOI, we may deem the permit application incomplete and we may reject it. If the timeframes are missed, then enforcement action may be taken. So I'm just making everyone aware of that. Hopefully we don't get to that point. We can come to an agreement on what information is needed and it's submitted and we can issue that permit. Next slide, please. Another change we made is the supervisor will sign off on the NOI. So the permit reviewer, their supervisor, will be involved with the permit reviewer, determining what items were additional information is needed on the permit application. We've heard feedback that people didn't know who to go to if they had a question. LSRPs, PRCRs, if they had a question on something that was a letter that was submitted, sent to them by the department, who do they talk to? So the supervisor will be on that letter If the PRCR doesn't agree with the comments or concerns raised by the department, we ask that you provide a response within the 60 days. Staff's been instructed to respond to the NOI responses as soon as possible, so to keep the process going. And we encourage LSRP PRCR to request a meeting with the reviewer and supervisor to go over any disagreements. And we may include technical staff in those meetings. So we may need a geologist or technical coordinator if there's a technical issue that we need to discuss. And we will offer additional time if delays occurred because of the department. So if we have asked for a meeting, we can't schedule it quickly, we'll provide extra time. Next slide, please. Also, as part of our PII process, we've formed 3 work groups, and they're comprised of DEP staff, LSRPs, and other stakeholders. We have the documentation and training group. So this was formed because we are not getting the documentation we need sometimes to review a permit application or other document. And that's where we come up with what we see are incomplete documents. We ask for more information. So we wanted to work on how to get documentation, what documentation is needed to be provided to the department. That group, we've met twice. Yesterday was our last meeting, our most recent meeting. We're considering developing checklists, templates, reports, conducting training with the goal of assisting LSRPs to provide the documentation the department needs. The second work group is technical disagreements. We've heard feedback that people didn't know who to go to if they had a technical disagreement. DEP felt that, for example, delineation wasn't complete. LSRP said it is complete. Where does that, how do we resolve those disagreements? And I encourage people to talk to the supervisors of the reviewer, raise it up to the bureau chief if needed. In this group, we met on Monday, and we discussed establishing a technical review panel that we used to have. It used to be 3 assistant directors that met if there was a technical disagreement. So we're looking at reestablishing that technical review panel. And our third group is, we're going to be discussing the processes for conducting additional reviews. The first meeting for that group will be held on August 15th. So DEP is required to inspect every document submitted. We then do further reviews on a subset of those documents submitted. This group is going to talk about what are those triggers for us to do additional reviews. Next slide, please. Other actions that we've taken to expedite the permitting process. We've transferred a lot of the administrative tasks that used to be done in the Bureau of Remedial Action Permitting by our technical reviewers. That's not a good use of their time, so we've transferred the administrative tasks to other groups. We're working on developing checklists for permit reviewers to use when we're reviewing permit applications. It'll make it easier for us to develop those NOI letters. We'll just provide a checklist saying these items were missing. It's going to be a more consistent message that's sent out to the LSRPs and PRCRs. So we're working on those. We also are evaluating triggers for determining when reviews of documents are needed, and we've made adjustments accordingly. So we have made some changes. We're not going to be reviewing as much. And we're going to continue evaluating what we need to review and why. One thing that I didn't put on the slide that we are working on, we're looking at changing the certifications that are going to be signed by LSRPs and PRCRs for some categories of permit applications. We're going to rely on those we're considering relying on those certifications to issue the permit with only a cursory or no review of the application. So the LSRP and PRCR will certify that certain conditions exist on the site. We're not going to do further review and issue the permit. That's still in the works. I didn't have it on the slide because I needed to talk to people in-house before I said that this is what we're considering. But I wanted to let you all know that that's something we're working on. Next slide, please. And finally, our proposed rule changes. We're including 5 focus permit types. These are the same types as those prioritized permits that I referenced earlier. They're going to be in the rule. The goal of those, having those focus permit types, is very little review will be required for those permits, and they will be ones that be quick to be issued. And we're going to put those in the rule. We are working on a 1 permit paradigm. We currently we have a soil permit, groundwater permit are the 2 types. We realized we needed a vapor intrusion permit if there's vapor intrusion issues. We realized we don't want to have 3 types of permits, media specific permits. We're going to combine those into 1 permit with multiple media components depending on the site. And we are also evaluating general permits and permits by certification that our land use program uses permits by certification. They're not going to be in this rule proposal. We are working on them. We didn't want to hold up this rule proposal to include those options, but we are working on those for a future rule proposal. And I think that's all I have. Yeah.
Do you want to pull up the flow charts?
It's up to you. If I don't need to go over those, I know George thought that.
Well, I might say, first of all, some of what I just heard is quite impressive. And before I open this up a question, and I think, Gwen, I don't know that it would be real instructive. That flow chart is really detailed. That could take like 3 hours to go through, particularly with all the mandates or criteria or so forth and so on. But it's out there, and I would advise everybody to take a look at it and understand it. But I want to let me start the questioning off, if I might. One of the problems is that Sarah was developed without the concept of having this RAP review process so detailed. The initial concept, and I was at all the meetings, all the stakeholder groups, and all the testimony that had to be offered to the legislature on every change of the law. The initial concept was that we needed a mechanism to keep track of sites that were not cleaned up to unrestricted standards. That was the sole purpose. And unfortunately, we called it a permit. And unfortunately, it became DEP's permit. And the killer is that it came at the end of the process before you got an RAO. So the LSRP and the private responsible parties were going along swimmingly, thinking they were doing the right thing, getting ready to get an RAO, and had to get through the RAP process. Stop. And that became a critical point. Gwen, you've addressed some issues that could solve that. And a lot of what we see is quite frankly, I'm going to be blunt, the distrust of LSRPs. And I'm not saying sometimes there are LSRPs that necessarily may cut corners or don't do the right thing. But as a rule, if you take a look at the certification penalties, the penalties that when you sign online, if you put that in front of your lawyer and you said LSRPs and said, should I sign this? The lawyer said, what are you, crazy? The rule, the certification includes 2 words that you never should sign, any and all. Your penalty is $5,000 for knowingly or wittingly are dishonest, so to speak, or not in a compliance with the rule. The penalty, it could be no less than $5,000, nor more than $75,000 per day per violation upon being found guilty. So at any rate, my point simply is that I do believe, Gwen, you're on the right track here. General permits and permit by rule, and now you've introduced a third concept, and that is relying upon the certification. And I would submit that that could be the way to solve this problem, if in fact it's carefully framed. So it's not really a question, it's a statement and kind of a little bit of a monologue. I apologize for that. So with that, I'm just going to open it up to questions. Phil, you want to lead the questions?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a question there somewhere. But one question came in, Gwen, just to confirm that if a permit application is withdrawn, even under the new process, a new fee would be required in that second submission, correct?
Correct.
This is a kind of long one. With the conditionally approved mandatory timeframe extensions issued for the department to review a groundwater remedial action permit application backlog, is the department going to be putting all sites receiving an NOTD, which will be the new NOI, I guess, into direct oversight? And the background to that is the latest metrics show 90% of RAP applications are denied. That would put 90% of SRP sites into direct oversight. And then it goes on to say, be advised that if the permit application is not administratively, technically complete, and the mandatory time frame date is missed, the site is immediately into direct oversight. That's a long question for, I guess, summing it down. In that situation, NOTD and NOI not satisfied, are those sites going in direct oversight?
I think some of this is site specific, so I don't want to just make a
Agreed.
broad statement. So while 90%, and there's many figures out there as far as percentages. So
Hello?
can you hear me?
Uh-oh.
I hear you. George, we hear you too.
Hello?
George, we hear you.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a lot of percentages out there, but one of the reasons the ECCC committee was formed was because we were so many permit applications. There were items missing on those, or additional information was needed, because we realized that while we had so many that we were sending letters out asking for more information, in the end, most of those permits were issued. So it seemed like there was just some missing documentation that if it was submitted right in the beginning, we would have been able to issue the permit. So I'm hoping that the 60-day time frame is going to allow people to give us the information that we need, avoiding the direct oversight issue. That's our hope. And I know people have contacted me about these conditional approvals, saying additional work's needed. Do it, and then we should be able to issue the permit, and if we can't, then you'll have to withdraw the permit. I just would prefer to deal with those situations on a site-by-site basis.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I don't want to go site by site here. Is department concerned about the May 2024 permit deadline with current backlog and the large number of extensions that will be required? How should LSRPs and the regulated community prepare for that?
So people are given extensions if the permit application's been submitted and it's on the desk of a DEP reviewer. We provide those extensions. Contact us if you need additional time. Make sure that just lines of communication are open and we can work with explaining how it all is going to work. Are we concerned about a backlog? Of course we are. Nobody wants to have a backlog. This is not where anybody wants to be. And we're doing our best to decrease that backlog and have timely reviews. That's certainly our goal, but it's a process. We're not going to be able to do it immediately. We've been working on this. We've been spending a lot of time and we're going to get there. It's just going to take some time.
Mm-hmm.
A question off of that and off of what you said on one of your slides, that if you get a notice of intent and you respond within the 60-day schedule, you're going to get a response back on that response. I guess my question is the response just to say, we have it, we're going to review it? Because I know the one thing that happens sometimes is when we respond to a deficiency, we get an email back months later that points out a deficiency that wasn't in the original NOI. So I guess the question is, when we get that NOI, is it going to be all encompassed, address this, and then you'll get an email back that says we're reviewing it and we'll be able to give a decision in the time frame?
So the goal is we'll issue the NOI, we'll get a response back, have a quick review of that response, not just saying we've received it, we'll get back to you later, but quickly review that response to say whether it's acceptable, and then we can issue the permit, or we still have outstanding questions. And at that point, it's probably worthwhile to then have a meeting if there's still some outstanding issues, unless the LSRP then says, yes, you're right, additional work's needed, I'm going to withdraw the permit. But if there's still we're not on the same page as far as whether additional work is needed, then I think a meeting would be appropriate. So the goal is to have these things reviewed quickly, the responses, and then issue the permit. Now, as far as what you mentioned, sometimes you get a letter saying, here were some, that when we were issuing deficiency letters, here's some deficiencies, the response is given, and we say, and here's some more deficiencies. That is not an ideal way to operate, for sure. That being said, there's some situations where a permit application was submitted just to be in accordance with the time frame, and it wasn't ready for a permit. Delineation wasn't complete. We may just say, delineation's not complete, we can't move any further on this permit application. Not going into details as far as all what was incomplete with the permit application, because there was a main issue of delineation not being complete. So we're going to make those clear that we didn't do a full review of the permit application because it is our belief that delineation is not complete.
And a question came in, which is a good question. I mean, aside from the fact that you see the vacant spots on your flow chart, you've had a lot of institutional knowledge leave over the past 3 to 4 years. Sometimes it is difficult to get meetings in a short period of time with key personnel, or to be able to get, the meeting just even scheduled in a short period of time. Is there going to be a way? I mean, I know, like, I'll throw the name out there, Marianne Krusak tends to attend almost every meeting. And I can only imagine that that's all she does in a 5-day period because of all the meetings she has to attend. Are there thoughts on dividing and conquering some of the responsibilities there and being able to improve upon that process?
Yes, Marianne attends meetings when they're the technical consult meetings. So the meetings that are going to be probably more frequent with these NOIs being issued are going to be more of the permit reviewer or document reviewer and their supervisor. They should be easier to schedule because Marianne's not going to attend all those. It's only going to be those technical type meetings that Marianne will attend. She's been promoted to an assistant director title. She's been working on filling the bureau chief position. So I think that'll free up some of her time when she gets some bureau chiefs in place. So, but again, she won't be attending all of the meetings for the permits.
How is the department resolving when a reviewer has a technical disagreement with the LSRP? Why is the department rejecting technical determinations by LSRP when there's no indication that the remedy is not protective?
So our goal is to ensure remedies are protective. And I think people have sometimes look at different benchmarks for determining protectiveness, maybe. We need to be clear in why we believe something is not protective. And we need to have the conversation with the LSRP to understand why the LSRP believes it's protective. Very frequently, it's because we just don't have some of the backup information. And sometimes we'll just get a few sentences and then saying, based on my independent professional judgment, this is protective. And we just need to understand that thought process a little bit better. That's been the vast majority of the issues that we've come up with. where we've issued in the past technical deficiency letters. So I'm hoping that between all the training we're giving on documentation that's needed, meetings, conversations, we'll be able to get to a place where we are getting the documentation we need and we're able to issue permits quickly.
I know there was one slide that you brought up where I think it was one of the committees is number 2, kind of discussing how to handle technical differences. Is that something that might be a panel or something that may be further discussion, that if there is the department looking at if there's a determination of a discrepancy between LSRP and DEP, that this group would kind of act as a sounding board?
Exactly. Yes, that's the intent. We are still working on the details of this. We've only met once with that group, but that was kind of the how we left it, that seemed to be a path we want to take. It's finding the right people within DEP to be on that panel. Like you saw on the org chart, we have a lot of missing positions. It used to be the assistant directors that were on that panel. We had, in the past, this was from years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we had this panel, and it was Barry Frasco, Len Ramino, and Wayne Howitz were the 3 people that were on that panel. So again, we just met on Monday with that group, had this discussion. I think it's a good idea to have the panel. Now it's just a matter of figuring out who should sit on that panel, when items, disagreements should be raised to the panel, what kind of the procedure will be for that. So we've just started talking about that and looking into it a little bit further.
And those 3 gentlemen were probably fishing this morning as opposed to working hard in Trenton. What is the process associated with the prioritized application reviews? This person submitted forms for 4 sites and have not received any type of confirmation, nor is there any change in data miner, i.e. the pending permit process report. So
Okay, so
that's the new form that came out a couple of weeks ago, and it said if you had existing sites that fell into this category, please submit the form. How do we know that it's been received, is being reviewed? What should we expect?
So I make the assumption it was received. We weren't going to email everyone saying we received your form. We've taken those forms, we're reviewing them, making sure that they do fit those categories. We received some forms for sites that did not fit the categories. And we are starting to process those permits. Just so people are aware, we had started looking through the permits that we already had in-house, the permit applications, to see if those permit applications fit those categories prior to us issuing that new form. We wanted to, we found the universe that we had in-house, we thought met those requirements or those conditions or types of permits. We wanted to make sure we had the full universe. That's why we sent the form out. So they are on the list. I've seen the list. We have an Excel spreadsheet of ones that we received and who they've been assigned to. It does take a little bit of time to get things updated in data miner, but we are working on those. If someone has a question as to whether their form was received, they can contact Mike Gaudio in the Bureau of Remedial Action Permitting.
I'll give you a chance to take a sip of your coffee and take a breather a second. I just put into the chat for everybody. I'll keep the questions going. That is the link on the DEP website, still the site remediation page for the stakeholder process. Gwen talked about RPII. There's a couple other technical groups going on. This is kept relatively up to date after meetings occur. I highly recommend that you look at that because there's good information there that Gwen has talked about. And as meetings occur, it gets updated there. So you'll be able to see things that are happening. So, okay, we had a little breather. We'll keep going. During the RAP groundwater M&A guidance training in January, the department indicated that M&A remedies were not appropriate for in situ groundwater remediation before the aquifer has returned to baseline conditions. Should applications for active category remedial action permit groundwater be submitted in these enhanced attenuation scenarios? If so, has the department issued an active category RAP groundwater for these type of enhanced attenuation remedies? It's a little specific. I don't know if you can weigh in on that.
Not 100% sure I understand the question. I think it sounds like there was in situ treatment. And then we didn't, then the application was submitted for M&A based on
Yes.
decreasing trends immediately after treatment. Is that,
I would say something like that. We don't know necessarily the time frame. I don't, and I don't think we want to go site specific, but I guess the question is, it sounds like it hasn't returned to baseline conditions.
right?
As
I think it,
such, attenuation wasn't allowed. Is there going to be, would the department issue an active permit for those type of sites?
that's a good question. I guess we could, but we generally issue active permits when it's kind of ongoing treatment. It sounded in this situation, there was treatment and now it looks like it's going to be an M&A remedy. And it's more of just a timing, wanting to get the enough quarters of groundwater data to show that M&A is actually happening and it's appropriate to have an M&A permit. We could consider, I think it's going to be site specific. I think we need to talk about whether it's appropriate to have an active permit for that, or whether it's worth it just to wait for the time for the M&A permit. Active permit, you're required to have financial assurance, so it may not be the right way to go. Just things to consider, but if that's a question, if that's a specific question, I think should be raised to, person who's asking that can reach out to Mike Gaudio to have that conversation.
And would that kind of be maybe a technical consult to look at the baseline, look at the situation and see if it is applicable for a permit?
Yeah, I think it's something to ask Mike, whether this is going to be a technical consult or whether it really is just a timing issue. Saying, let's just wait for the groundwater to get back to, time when we can really see if M&A is appropriate. And have enough quarters of data to show that.
That's Mike Gaudio.
Yes, yes, he's the bureau chief for Bureau of Remediation Permitting.
Just an interesting question. Is any idea how many of the prioritized application forms were submitted?
I believe the full universe, last time I checked, so these were permits that we already had in-house that we identified that fit those 5 prioritized categories, and the forms, we were about 175.
Question came in, and I think we've already talked about this. Someone had made the, would it make sense to have a, like an arbiter to do technical disagreements? I think we talked about that, something being considered and discussed and really the issue is who's the proper people from DEP to do that. With the retirement of so many seasoned DEP staff, is it possible to supplement DEP staff on the panel with seasoned LSRPs? I don't know if seasoned means that you have pepper hair or what that might be, but that's an interesting question. Is that being discussed?
It was brought up at our meeting we had on Monday with the group, and it's something to think about. We're thinking about it. It's certainly an interesting concept. Whether we have people that are interested in doing that is another story, but it's something that we're considering.
Yeah, and I know that the LSRPA offers a sounding board, but that's a little different than a board inside of the department that has DEP input. I think that definitely is. When you do the sounding board at LSRPA, you're still then have to go to DEP and you can get somebody who disagrees. I think if you had participation from LSRPs and the DEP on that one panel, maybe it's more concrete. I don't know, but again, nothing is final until the permit's issued.
Right, and the idea was to have, based on our committee discussion on Monday, just to get other LSRPs to get their input as to just not looking at it from the only department perspective, but how an LSRP would look at the technical issue.
Site-specific questions relative to permits go to Mike Gaudio?
Yes, unless you've received a letter from a permit reviewer and their supervisor, and you already know who their immediate supervisor is, that would be the first step to take. If you have other issues that you don't know who the reviewer and immediate supervisor are, then you can contact Mike and he can either handle it himself or refer you to the supervisor who's handling it.
Well, someone recommended having a retired LSRP. Yeah.
Right, that's what was mentioned at the committee meeting on Monday.
I think George already volunteered his time.
I would definitely volunteer my time if that were the case.
Yeah. Would the time to this goes back to that question about attenuation, M&A permit versus active. Would the time to return to baseline conditions for demonstration of M&A be considered a justification for a mandatory timeframe extension?
We would consider that. I would have to, I don't want to, I think we have to look at the site itself and see as far as extensions. It certainly is not off the table, but I can't speak to that generally at this point.
Someone asked about the org chart that's in the link I put there. I'll share it again. And I don't have it up in front of me, but it says for the org chart that shows the person heading BIRA as Kevin Schick instead of Alan Motter. I didn't look at the chart. Does it still say Kevin Schick?
Oh, I guess so. I truly didn't look at that side because that's not my division, but one of the reasons we don't share org charts is because they take forever to be updated. But Kevin Schick did retire. Alan Motter is filling in as in an acting capacity at this time.
Yeah, I'm looking. I think it still says vacant. I'm just looking real quick. I'll share that again though. Great, thanks for the answer. After the notice of intent is issued, there is a 60-day response requirement. Does the DEP have a time requirement to respond? Other have been instructed to respond ASAP. So I think that question is, if you have to respond within 60 days, is there any timeframes on the department?
Oh, did we give ourselves a time frame? No, but we've instructed staff to respond as soon as possible. So our goal is to get everything done within that 60-day period. We do not want to have a long delay for DEP to get back to the NOI, issue the permit. We want everything to be as close to that 60-day period as possible. Realizing that LSRP may not submit something till day 59 of the 60 days. But again, trying to keep things moving as quickly as possible, that's our goal.
If the NOIs are coming from the supervisor or division director, can the LSRP seek to speak to that individual, or are they just speaking to the permit writer?
The NOIs are coming from the reviewer. It has done the review, discussed it with their supervisor, and if there's an issue that needs to be discussed, it's the permit reviewer, supervisor, or the first people that the LSRP should contact.
So they should contact the supervisor.
Yes.
Everything's on the 60-day time frame. You had made a comment that if the DEP holds you up, you can get an extension. Are there other potentials of getting the extension, or is that going to be a hard 60 days?
We want it to be a hard 60 days. So what we were finding when we were giving people 30 days, they said 30 days isn't enough. Can you give us an extension? And then it became another extension, and then it just became too long. And then the permit reviewer would look at something and kind of lost track of where things were, and having to do reviewing things again to remind themselves of where things were left off. So we want to keep it within the 60 days.
You had mentioned the department is considering SRP is CSRR is considering new certifications that may be placed on the PRCR and the LSRP. I know that in recent meetings, we've talked about rule language not being shared outside of the department. Would that be something that would be shared with the PRCRs and LSRPs before it was initiated? Or is that something that would just come out from the department?
I'm not sure. I'm not against sharing it, but this is something that I'm in discussions with our deputy attorney generals on. So I'm not sure how it will all work. I mean, this is going to be a kind of a voluntary thing. If you want to get your permit quickly through, you can sign these certifications saying I'm certifying to these conditions. It really is still in the works. And as I'm saying, it's voluntary. I guess I really need to be careful with what I'm saying here because it truly is just in discussion at this point.
Because as George stated early on, the current certifications are pretty in-depth and a lot gets put on that LSRP signature. So and that was something that we kind of didn't really see before it came out. And, but we sign it every day. So just wanted to know if that'd be something to be shared.
Yeah, just to make that come alive. The certification has, I think, 6 rubrics. Actually embedded in those 6 rubrics are over 12 demands and requirements for the LSRP that they're certifying. It's very onerous.
I got a couple more and then we're going to call it a day. During the last SHRAG meeting, the limitation of the SRAP requirement as specified in brownfields, parentheses, only for exceedances of residential standards, was brought up relative to various other SRAP department requirements, for example, terms of ecological screening criteria. Is there further information on this issue? So SRAP, soil remediation, AP, I'm drawing a blank. Steve, tell me what SR, because I think I saw Gwen make the same face I made. What's
It's just
SR?
it's a soil remedial action permit and deed notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's limitation on the soil remediation action permit requirement as specified was brought up relative to various other soil remediation action permits, department requirements, for example, ecological screening criteria. Is there further information on this discussion?
Yeah, I think it was mostly in terms of the deed notice requirement, but you know, integrated with the SRAP.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give a lot of detail with that. I remember this issue being brought up at the meeting, the requirement for deed notice when ecological. I thought it was related to capping. If you were addressing the ecological pathway via cap, we needed to have a deed notice on that to have the cap remain in place and be inspected. But I don't want to get into too much detail because I think that's something you can speak to Alan Motter about if there was concerns with that. And also if it's a permitting issue, you can speak with Mike Gaudia.
The only other things that are out here, there's a lot of back and forth on the 60-day clock. If there's, if you had to collect a sample and respond back, laboratory turnaround time may not be fast enough to meet 60 days. If there was, one sample that may need to be collected and the driller schedule lab turnaround time, you may not be 60. I guess, in the summation is, and I know I asked this question already. So, if you have a meeting and you discuss the work that needs to be done, will the department have some potential ability for flexibility of that 60 days?
I'm not going to say it's not possible, but when a permit application is submitted, there shouldn't be the need for additional field work to be done. We understand that there may be circumstances where there's a disagreement between the LSRP and DEP, and the LSRP just says, all right, I'll take another sample just to end this conversation, right? Just to get things moving. And that's kind of the universe we were looking at, where it's just, if they're willing to go out and do the work, it'll get things moving along. Then we're going to allow 60 days in order to do that. But we really want it to be a hard stop at 60 days. So I can't say across the board we're going to allow more time. I'm just not going to be able to say that. But if there's an issue, bring it up to the permit reviewer and the supervisor.
And Phil, before we let Gwen go,
Hard stops, it's 9:30, so you go, George.
Phil, just let me just say a couple things. First of all, Gwen, I have a question. At what point do you inform the PRCR that things are not going well with the LSRP? On what documents are the PRCR copied on, for letters of deficiencies, or how does that work?
They're sent the NOI.
They are sent the NOI.
Yes.
And you don't believe that is an efficient way of controlling the quality of the LSRPs having the economic factors work on in your favor, so to speak? And it's just that's rhetorical. Don't even answer that question. Phil, I'm gonna close by simply saying, Gwen, you're impressive in what you're envisioning. It's creative. It could help a lot. You're a victim of circumstance. You didn't plan to have the RAP process at the end of the process, which then holds up the issue as RAOs, but it happened. I think the certification process would go a long way in trusting the LSRP, but it needs to be enforced, no doubt about it. So thank you very much for sharing your information. Thank you very much for being the, like I say, the linchpin to change in this process. Clearly, you are doing a lot of work. And for that, you should be thanked. And thank you for participating tonight.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And thank you very much, Gwen. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the speed round of questions. As I did say to everybody, we will post this on our website probably later today or tomorrow. You can always share it and look at it. And I just put the slides back up again. And I would just throw out there also, Gwen is probably working about 39 hours a day, but very responsive. I'm not going to say everybody should reach out to her, but when you reach out to her, she does respond. And I think that she's done a great job since she's been moved up to director. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Amen.
Everyone have a good day and enjoy the weather. Kathleen, I'm going to put the slides up one more time for you. Slides are right there in the chat. There's the flow charts too.